Hello and welcome to Mariah's Occult Kitchen, or welcome back to Mariah's Occult Kitchen. Today we are going to be making clam chowder and reacting to KallmeKris. I picked out a specific one today because over on my other channel, The Occult Life, we were talking about this specific serial killer on the live. The horrors of the Fox Hollow Farm serial killer. I believe he was a really famous Canadian serial killer. If I have my memories correct, this is also the same one where he gave some of the bodies away to a processing plant that may or may not have put them in gummy candy. So let's take a look and watch this. We're going to be watching this, but I'm going to be cutting up all the vegetables for this as we're watching, and I'll pause periodically to give my thoughts on it. Here we go.
It began with bones. In the quiet woods behind a wealthy Indiana estate, investigators made a grisly discovery. Scattered fragments of human remains buried beneath the leaves, burned, broken, and forgotten. And what they uncovered in that soil would unravel the facade of a man.
Indiana, so I think it was actually in America. Someone today said Canada.
Who, by all appearances, had it all. A thriving business, a loving family, a mansion hidden among the trees. But behind closed doors, something unthinkable was happening. He was charming, respected, a devoted husband, and he was stalking young men and dragging them into the dark. This is not just the story of a killer. It's a story of an entire community that wasn't heard, a survivor who refused to stay silent, and the horrifying truth buried beneath the surface of a seemingly perfect life. This is the story of Herb Baumeister. Crime, conspiracy, cults, serial killers, and murder. All things that I love to consume, and I know you do too, you sick, twisted, beautiful, intellectually minded freak.
Got me.
Sorry about that. But yeah, today we're getting into a big case, a case that was highly recommended. I saw dozens of comments requesting this case. It has taken a while to get done, but we are here. It is absolutely horrifying. So trigger warning there, but without further ado, let's unbuckle our seatbelts, go Mach 5 down the highway, slam on the brakes, and bust through this windshield into this
trigger warning. It's a pretty
case together.
Woo. So you might want to skip past it if you just want to know about the clam chowder.
So Herbert Richard Baumeister was born in Indianapolis on April 7th, 1947, and he was the oldest of 4 children in a comfortable middle-class family. And his father, Dr. Herbert E. Baumeister, was an anesthesiologist, and his mother, Elizabeth, was a homemaker. So outwardly, Herb's early
This might not be the
childhood
same case.
Pretty normal. But as he entered adolescence, disturbing behavior began to emerge, like we see with many serial killers in their early adolescence, just doing the most fucked up shit. So classmates and teachers noted that young Herb developed morbid fascinations, one being he was intensely curious about the taste of human urine. Yeah, we're really getting into it really quick with this one, so you know, buckle up. And also, you guessed it, had a tendency to play with dead animals. We're making that serial killer stew real quick. And in one incident, he placed a dead crow on a teacher's desk at North Central High School. Kid was fucked up 2 ways to Sunday. And on another occasion, he urinated on his teacher's desk, just shocking his entire classroom. It's like he needed that shock factor. He needed to be the center of attention in the most morbid, fucked up ways. And such bizarre antics went far beyond typical teenage rebellion and hinted at a deeply, deeply troubled mind. I mean, we had some jokesters in high school, but nobody was pissing on the teachers' desks and leaving, you know, effigies of dead crows there too. It's just like a little too much. So alarmed by his son's behavior, Herb's father arranged for a psychiatric evaluation during Herb's teens. Good on dad. Usually we don't hear this. We just hear the parents ignoring this, so that's good at least, and he was a doctor, so that makes sense. And the doctors diagnosed Herb with paranoid schizophrenia, as well as antisocial personality disorder. So, you know, We have nature,
Probably
nurture.
won't need that last
There's
one.
both going on here. He's got an excuse, but also not okay. It's not an excuse.
Okay.
It's not an excuse as to harming things. And
Ooh, not at all. I didn't even think about this, but this may not be an appetizing thing to react to while cooking. I'm not really sure. Okay, so this is the first time I'm doing it this way. Normally I use probably 3 or 4 bottles of the clam juice, along with the clam juice that's actually already in the cans, but I did find this seafood stock, and I figured, why not give that a try? Like, just some seafood stock to start off with, and then see how that goes. We could add the clam juice into it. That might deepen the flavor. Yeah, I think that'll be good. So we will just start off with 2 bottles of this clam juice. There is a little bit of remnants in the bottom, so when I add the cream into it later on, after I boil this down with the potatoes, then I normally kind of clean out the clam juice containers with the milk. See how there's a lot left in there. We are not going to let any of that go to waste, but we'll just start off here putting all the potatoes in the clam juice and the seafood stock to begin with. I might put this celery in a bit later. I do have garlic too. I think I'm just going to throw everything in actually all at once. Why not? Get that started, and then we'll go back to watching, because this is a rather long episode too. So this is going to be kind of a longer Mariah's Occult Kitchen, just so that you all are aware. Okay, while this is boiling, we'll get our garlic chopped up, and then that'll go in there too, but then we're going to watch. Okay, so I like to get that boiling on the stove for maybe about 15 to 20 minutes. While that's boiling, we will watch some KallmeKris. And yes, we are going to kind of simmer it down a little bit, just to kind of condense that clam juice seafood flavor and to soften up the potatoes. Let's take a look.
Doing horrible things, but at least, they nipped it in the bud. Great, he's going to get some medication maybe and he'll be great, right? Right? No, we wouldn't be here talking if that were the case. So having these disorders meant that Herb might suffer delusions or extreme paranoia and had a diminished sense of empathy or regard for social norms. So something quite literally out of his control. So again, I'm not going to give him anything, but there is something that he can't control on his own, at least, without therapy or medication or anything like that. But despite this diagnosis, there is no evidence Herb received sustained treatment at that time. And that's the big issue, because it could have been a different story if he actually got the real help that he needed or actually stayed with some sort of treatment, but he did not. And instead, he was eventually just returned to school. The kid didn't know what's going on. He's got a fucked up brain, and they're just like, he'll be all right. So for a brief period, Herb's behavior improved enough to appear socially acceptable, and he managed to graduate high school in 1965. However, his reputation had already been tainted by his earlier outbursts and macabre interests, and classmates shunned him, remembering the boy who toyed with dead creatures and caused classroom disruptions. So Herb became increasingly withdrawn and reclusive during his late teens. You have the
Yeah, that'll make things worse for sure. Like, kids picking on you, like, it just compounds the issue, I think. But poor guy should have got some better help.
Nature, where it's like he can't help but have these awful disorders that he can't help. And then there's the nurture, which is like he's clearly not being nurtured through this. He's not being treated for this, and he's just kind of being thrown to the wolves in a very vulnerable, fucked up state. Again, I am by no means justifying what he's going to do in the future, because I think he should burn in hell. But when you're a kid, hopefully you can get that help. And this,
yeah, and she's got a real good point there. Like, some of these people, I feel like they could have been helped maybe a little bit, or maybe watched better and helped medication. I don't know. it doesn't excuse what happens later on in life. But oh, that is a hard thing.
Kid did not get any meaningful help, and I'll leave it at that. It's part of the reason why I actually like looking into these cases, because I like looking at the psychological aspect and nature versus nurture and how they were raised and what caused it and all that kind of stuff.
Me too.
And sometimes there's just a tiny little inkling of sympathy here and there when they're like kids and they can't do anything about it, but it's all gone when they're adults. You know, you learn societal norms and, you know, you might suffer with these kinds of things, but unless you get help, I don't know what you can do. I'm not a doctor. I'm just a stupid YouTuber. But Herb, like many other serial killers, had those early warning signs that are almost all there for most cases we go through. And that is obsession with urination or wetting the bed, and obsession with death and volatile emotional outbursts. All we're missing at this point is arsony, basically. But in the conservative 1960s, such behavior was often quietly swept under the rug. Different time. So Herb Baumeister was a troubled young man who learned to mask his oddities when needed. A skill he would later use to hide far darker impulses. Knowingly. And this is where we get into the, oh, he knows what he's doing is wrong. That's wrong, and that's terrible, and that makes you evil. So after high school, Herb's attempts at higher education and steady employment were checkered. And he would enroll in Indiana University in 1965, but would drop out after one semester. And he returned to IU in 1967, where he would meet his future wife, Juliana, or Julie Sater, but again, left before completing a term. So in 1972, Herb tried taking classes at Butler University with similar results, quitting after a single semester. Guy has commitment issues. And during this...
Well, okay, so here's the thing. I heard, because I do watch a lot of this stuff, kind of like she does too. I go through binge phases where I watch a lot of true crime. And it seems like serial killers, I could be wrong about this. Comment down below if I am. But they are very smart, but they can't do school for some reason. It's the whole control issue. It's the staying focused and all of that. I'm not really sure what all goes into it, but I know I've heard that before. I could be wrong though, so don't take my word for it.
Period in November of 1971, 24-year-old Herb Baumeister married Juliana Sater, who was a former high school journalism teacher who he had courted in college. And Julie, by all accounts, was a smart and patient woman, which you needed to be if you were with this guy, and notably a fellow young conservative. So the two had bonded in part over working together at the university's Young Republicans Club. And to Julie and others, Herb could seem eccentric, but essentially harmless. So nobody really saw those red flags because nobody knew about these outbursts that happened when he was younger. I mean, it was the 60s. It's not like it was posted online or anything. If he was able to quite literally shove all that under the rug.
Ooh, yeah, different time. Okay, just got me a little spiced apple cider. Didn't heat it up, but that's okay. Still tastes good.
So they would settle into a home in an Indianapolis suburb and would go on to have 3 children together in the coming years. But Herb's personal eccentricities did not disappear during this time. Because it was only 6 months into the marriage, his mental health faltered very badly, and he became so depressed and erratic that his father had him committed to a psychiatric hospital for about 2 months in 1972. Quote, he was hurting and needed help, unquote. Julie later explained of that period. So again, at least he's getting help at this point that he really didn't get as a kid. So Herb would recover enough to assume a normal life, yet he continued to exhibit unusual behavior and struggled to hold jobs, similar to him dropping out all the time.
Yeah, that's kind of the other thing that I hear about serial killers, like another way to profile them. They can't complete school, they drop out easily, they can't hold a job. Again, correct me if I'm wrong down below.
You just got tired of stuff really fast, and that could be very much a part of the disorders he already has, and part B, that he just thought he was too good to be a part of anything that was going on in society. Alright, so I, much like yourselves, like to consume true crime content, believe it or not. And sometimes I do that by watching documentaries on my favorite streaming services. Like a few months ago, I was trying to catch up on this murder mystery miniseries that I was watching on a streaming service, and then bang! I got geo-blocked. And it was shortly after that I discovered Surfshark. Thank you to Surfshark
We're
for
just gonna
sponsoring
go past
this video.
this real quick. The Surfshark thing. If you guys don't know me, I don't really believe in having things like Surfshark. I mean, yeah, you can get past the geo blocks and stuff like that, so you can get to content that's like in every country, but I think that's really the only benefit. I don't really think they protect your identity that much, because there's a lot of reasons. Tell me what you think. But I'm gonna skip over this Surfshark stuff. Let's see. Okay.
So in the 1970s, he worked as a copy boy at the Indianapolis Star newspaper, and later landed a position at the Indiana Bureau of Motor Vehicles, which was BMV. And at the BMV, Herb initially impressed colleagues with his strong work ethic, but his bizarre conduct soon resurfaced. Because see, again, his guy didn't last long. And people would start to notice that Herb had a dark, offbeat sense of humor and a tendency to flout norms. And at one point, he sent his coworkers an inappropriate Christmas card showing himself and another man dressed in drag, which is like, today, slay queen, you know? But in the 1960s, like psychiatric prison, you know? So the prank did...
Different time. It may have been a slight red flag back then, because again, it wasn't part of the social norm. Today, we're more accepting about people expressing themselves. So, yeah, she's right. Today it would be like, slay queen.
Did not go over well in the conservative office environment, shockingly. So as time went on, Herb grew domineering and aggressive with his colleagues. He started to get an ego. The breaking point came in 1985 when BMV officials discovered that someone had urinated on the manager's desk.
I do have some seasoning mixture right here, which I will put the herbs and seasonings I put right over here to let you know what all goes into the seasoning mixture that's going to go into the soup as well. And we're going to hit play.
You guessed it. It's ol' Herb. Loves pissing and shit. Like a dog, which is what he is. Just
again, this might not have been the right one to pick.
Disgusting dog, as we will see. So Herb was caught having urinated on a letter addressed to the governor, and it was determined he was likely responsible for the earlier incident of urine left on his manager's desk. So
I actually might believe all the words. I'll leave it in the very beginning, and then I'm going to bleep
Herb
it.
Fired in 1985, and it was just a humiliating end to his government job, and it just foreshadowed the increasingly erratic pattern of Herb's adult life. So by his late 30s, Herb Baumeister was outwardly a married father of 3, but he was also a man grappling with mental illnesses and concealed desires. And unbeknownst to his wife, Herb began spending time in Indianapolis's gay nightlife scene after losing his BMV job. So on top of everything else, paranoid schizophrenia, the personality disorder, he's also, by all accounts, gay, but he has to internalize it, whether it's just because of the time period or that he's embarrassed or because he has a family and he's cheating on his wife, all this stuff. So he's got a lot of things internally building up, which is really bad with somebody who tends to be violent and have outbursts. So he would go out drinking at gay bars, likely exploring a side of himself that he kept hidden at home. And in 1985 and 1986, he had 2 run-ins with the law. One for a hit and run while driving drunk, and another for conspiracy to commit theft. And both charges were eventually dropped, but these incidences just show Herb skirting the edges of criminal behavior years before his killing spree even began. So he already had this superiority complex building inside of himself, because he could get away with everything, you know, besides pissing on his manager's desk or whatever. He got fired for that, at least. And this is when friends and family noticed changes as well. Because at home in the suburban Steinmeier neighborhood, neighbors found Herb odd and unpredictable, because it could be generous, in one moment handing out free magazines and concert tickets to neighbor kids, and then the next moment he'd get explosively angry over trivial things. And this is with the personality disorder coming to head, probably on top of the paranoid schizophrenia. And Julie later revealed an intimate detail that spoke volumes about their marriages. Because in over 25 years together, she and Herb had only been sexually intimate only 6 times. And she had never even seen him fully
Only 6
nude.
times? How did they
So
get
this
the 3
lack
kids
of
that they
physical closeness suggests Herb's sexual interests
That is
lay
interesting.
elsewhere. As we know, I mean, he liked to go to gay bars. I can safely assume was just using Julie as a beard, as the kids may say nowadays, which is basically a cover. Like he wanted to appear like he had straight life when in actuality he was gay, and internalizing all sorts of horrible feelings. Like the violent ones, not that you're gay, you can be gay, that's totally fine. But in the 60s, it was a different story. So indeed, Herb was living a closeted life, maintaining the appearance of a straight, conservative family man while secretly engaging with men at gay bars. So the conflict between
the violence part is the problem.
his public persona and private desires would only intensify in the coming years, setting the stage for his double life as a serial killer. So by the late 1980s, Herb Baumeister seemed to find his footing as an entrepreneur, even as his personal oddities persisted. And in 1988, with financial help from his mother, Herb opened a thrift store called Save-A-Lot in Indianapolis. It's a great name, Herb. And Herb would just pour his energy into this store like he hadn't done with any other job before. And his hard work would pay off, because Save-A-Lot was clean, well-organized, and stocked with quality used goods.
Okay, I'm going to stop here because this is not the same. This is not the same story that I'm thinking about. If I can find out what that is that I was thinking about, I will put the name of it over here. I think I saw it on Netflix or something like that, but I digress.
Quickly setting it apart from other thrift shops, and it became a modest success. And Herb's confidence would just grow from this, because it didn't take much for this guy's head to just blow up with ego. So over the next few years, he expanded, eventually operating 2, and by some reports 3, Save-A-Lot thrift store locations in the Indianapolis area. So with this business boom came a significant lifestyle upgrade. And in November of 1991, despite recent marital strains, Herb and Julie made a bold purchase, which was a sprawling 18-acre estate in Westfield, just north of Indianapolis. And the estate, which Herb named Fox Hollow Farm, yeah, this is the place, featured a 1,000-plus square meter Tudor-style mansion completed with elegant features like stained glass windows, multiple fireplaces, and an indoor swimming pool. And the property was reportedly worth nearly $1 million, which was a testament to the outward success the Baumeisters projected. And to neighbors and friends, the Baumeisters family now seemed to be living the American dream. A booming business, a country manor home, and 3 happy children. And Julie continued to stand by Herb, working in the business and raising their son and 2 daughters. So few could have guessed the turmoil and secrets that festered behind closed doors at Fox Hollow Farm. Because despite the beautiful new home and thriving stores, Herb's double identity was intensifying. And his coworkers and employees began noticing that their boss's behavior grew more volatile in the early 1990s. Because Herb would be absent from work for long stretches during the day without any sort of explanation, and became increasingly irritable and erratic when present. And financial problems also started to mount. And by 1994, the Save-A-Lot enterprise was faltering because the second store had not replicated the success of the first. And debts were starting to pile up, and vendors were suing for unpaid bills. Guy pulled the trigger before he actually reached like a state of success. It was all about image for Herb. He needed to have that manner, to have that outward appearance of being like the perfect American family, but in actuality, it was much different. And under all this strain, Herb's marriage was deteriorating, to say the least. And in early 1991, just months before buying Fox Hollow Farm, Herb had briefly moved out of the family home and even filed for divorce, citing irreconcilable differences, which for Herb means he likes men. and not women. But yeah, I don't think Julie knew that. Or maybe she did know that. I don't really know. Yet, he and Julie reconciled later that year, deciding to give the marriage another try while moving into the new Westfield estate. But still, the relationship remained very rocky, and Julie noticed Herb's moods swinging wildly. And former colleagues later describe Herb as a, quote, perfectionist given to sudden unprovoked rages. Sounds awful. Just recalling how the smallest thing could just set him off. And these fits of anger, just combined with Herb's secretive habits, made life at Fox Hollow Farm increasingly tense for his family. And Julie would later admit that her husband was becoming, quote, erratic and difficult to live with during this period. And crucially, Herb's hidden life continued alongside his family life. Because at night, or when his wife and kids were out of town, Herb frequented gay bars in downtown Indianapolis, introducing himself to strangers as Brian Smart. He even called himself Smart. He got to make up a name for himself, and he called himself Smart. What a f***ing dumbass. But during this time, he was living out urges he could not openly acknowledge in his conservative household. So this clandestine behavior just suggested that Herb felt he had to compartmentalize his identity. And the respectable, heterosexual family man in one compartment, and the gay man seeking anonymous encounters in another. And it is within this secret, nocturnal world that Herb's darkest tendencies began to manifest. Because Herb's ability to maintain his facade of normalcy kept suspicions at bay for a while. Because by day, he was a store owner and a dad driving his kids to school, and at night, he prowled gay bars at night with the fake name, Brian Smart. So he just straddled these two worlds, and for a time, he managed to keep each from discovering the other. And in hindsight, the contradictions in Herb Baumeister's life were very stark. Because he lived in a mansion, yet his businesses were verging on bankruptcy, and he presented as a devoted husband, yet had almost no physical intimacy with his wife, and, cheated on her with other men, and he championed family values in public, yet spent his free hours cruising gay clubs in secret. And friends and family who knew Herb in the early 90s would later struggle to reconcile the duality that they observed. So by the early 1990s, gay men in Indianapolis were quietly...
All right, so we got it on for another 10 minutes. I put the garlic in, and we're gonna let it boil down a little bit more, and then we will start adding in all the clams, crab meat, or I'll tell you what all goes in there in just a moment. We will hit play.
Vanishing without explanation. And in May of 1993, the trend became alarming, because one by one, young men who frequented Indianapolis gay bars were reported missing. And at first, these disappearances attracted little public attention, because there was no bodies immediately found, just men who went out for the evening and never returned home. And within the LGBTQ+ community, word spread that something was terribly wrong. And amid this backdrop, Herb Baumeister was about to begin his killing spree in earnest. So investigators now believe Herb's murderous activity started around the 1980s, possibly as early as the mid-80s, and then escalated in the 1990s. So authorities suspected that Baumeister may have been an uncaught serial killer known as the I-70 Strangler, which we've briefly talked about in one of my 3-part video series. But I feel like I should do like a full-blown video on that person, which could have been Herb Baumeister. Because throughout the 1980s, between 1980 and 1991, at least 11 men were found strangled and dumped in rural areas near Interstate 70 in Indiana and Ohio. And these victims were mostly young, gay men who had last been seen at Indianapolis gay bars. And their not clothed or partially clothed bodies were discarded off highways in streams or ditches. And the killings mysteriously stopped in 1991, the same year Herb purchased Fox Hollow Farm. And in 1998, investigators noted that once Herb had his secluded 18-acre property, he no longer needed...
Interesting. It'll be interesting to find out if they actually connected these two murders or not. I know this video is quite a bit longer, so they could have. Let's keep watching.
Known as the I-70 Strangler, which we've briefly talked about in one of my 3-part video series. But I feel like I should do like a full-blown video on that person, which could have been Herb Baumeister. Because throughout the 1980s, between 1980 and 1991, at least 11 men were found strangled and dumped in rural areas near Interstate 70 in Indiana and Ohio. And these victims were mostly young, gay men who had last been seen at Indianapolis gay bars. And their not clothed or partially clothed bodies were discarded off highways in streams or ditches. And the killings mysteriously stopped in 1991, the same year Herb purchased Fox Hollow Farm. And in 1998, investigators noted that once Herb had his secluded 18-acre property, he no longer needed to risk dumping bodies along the interstate. That's the theory. And there's reasons why we can't confirm this, but I'll get into that later. But if all true, Herb Baumeister's murder career had begun well before he ever killed on his own property. And it's possible he honed his methods on those highway killings, and then, once he had Fox Hollow Farm as a private murder ground, he brutally reached new heights. So by 1993, Baumeister was actively hunting victims in Indianapolis, specifically the Indianapolis gay bars. And he typically targeted men in their teens to 20s or even 30s, though one victim was as old as 46. And usually Herb's victims were white males. And Herb's MO was both cunning and predatory, because he would spend the evening cruising popular gay bars like the 501 Club or others along Massachusetts Avenue, and he presented himself as a friendly, fun-loving man named Brian Smart. And Baumeister would single out a potential victim, often someone.
Okay, I've turned that down to a simmer, and we are going to make a roux to thicken up the chowder. So I have about 2 tablespoons of butter that I made myself. I'm going to save this last tablespoon to go actually into the soup, the chowder as well. So we'll just set that aside for now. How you make a roux is you take the 2 tablespoons of butter and you melt them down, and then you add in the flour. I think it's up to about 4 tablespoons until it's thick, and you kind of cook the butter a little bit. And then when you add that into a broth milk base, it's going to thicken it up. Whereas the butter is just bubbling, you start to add a little bit of flour in, a little bit at a time. Just until you get, that was about 2 tablespoons. Probably put another tablespoon in there. And you get this paste. And now at this point you are cooking it on medium low. You can turn it down a little bit to low. Just cook it down a little bit more. That is a roux. And this you're going to be adding into the chowder to thicken it up. At this point, it's cooked down for another 10 minutes with the garlic in it. We're going to go ahead and start adding our clams in. I have 2 cans of minced clams. My favorite is Snow's brand. It's the same brand that I used of the clam juice. So we got 2 of the minced and 1 can of chopped. We are also putting 1 can of bumblebee white crab meat. It doesn't have to be chunk. You can get the cheaper stuff. It's just to add and deepen that like seafood, rich seafood flavor that clam chowder has. So we're going to be putting those in right now. Okay, so we added in the cans of clam and the crab meat. We also added in the tablespoon of butter. Now we're going to be putting some half and half in there and the seasoning. And now the clam chowder is pretty much done. I didn't make enough roux, so if you're doing this and you're making the roux, I would go for 3 to 4 tablespoons of butter and keep adding until you have that slurry like you saw me make, kind of like the cooked butter and flour mixture, and then you add that in. It does take a little bit longer to thicken up with that, but it will over time. You just turn it up to high heat. But I will have to come back tomorrow to finish up KallmeKris because dinner is ready now. So we're going to have a taste test of that.
Hello, everyone. Editing Mariah here. And just to let you know, we did not finish that episode of KallmeKris. I really do apologize about that, but it was just too highly disturbing for me. And I actually do enjoy consuming true crime content, but that one was a little bit much for me. But I do have it linked down below. If you want to go over and to KallmeKris's channel and watch the rest of it to find out what happened, feel free. Again, I'm really sorry, but we will get back to it. We're now going to taste test that clam chowder.
All right, we're back and we're about to try out the New England clam chowder. You ready? It is really hot, by the way. Yeah, it's very garlic. I put a lot of garlic in it, because we've been sick recently. It's very hot. Mm. That's some good stuff, though. Good old comfort food after that. All right, we will see you next time. Until then.